This is public enemy number one.
Actually, it is a very lovely flowering plant.
We might be winning the battle, but we're by no means winning the war.
Snowdonia, North Wales, renowned for its rugged beauty and rich wildlife. It's an area under threat. The threat this time is not from humans, but from an alien species. Rod Gritton, ecologist at Snowdonia National Park, faces a formidable enemy.
This may look beautiful, but actually it's a real problem for the Snowdonia National Park. Every one of these seedlings has got leaves that are poisonous to wildlife. The roots are producing a toxin, a poison that will stop anything else growing near it. And when a bush like this gets to the size it is, it's casting such a dense shade that nothing will grow underneath it. It's a real problem for biodiversity.
Rhododendron ponticum is the Latin name for the plant which is spreading like wildfire through Snowdonia. In an attempt to control it, Rod Gritton is bringing out the big guns.
The problem in Snowdonia is enormous, and we're finding that cutting this stuff by hand is taking far too long. And we've got the opportunity in an open site like this to actually use a machine of this sort.
It is ironic that for once man's destruction of a forest is not a threat to biodiversity, but an attempt to preserve it. Biodiversity is a measure of the number of species in an ecosystem. In Snowdonia, different species have evolved together over thousands of years to form a complex web of interconnecting relationships. The sudden introduction of an alien species can shatter this natural balance. If left unchecked, this new species will dominate, and what was once a rich biodiversity will become a monoculture. So if Rhododendron ponticum isn't a native plant, the question is, where did it come from? In the shadow of the Snowdonian mountains lies Bodnant Gardens. Thousands of visitors flock each season to admire hundreds of exotic rhododendron plants. Martin Puddle, the head gardener at Bodnant, comes from a long line of rhododendron experts.
None of these rhododendrons which you see here are native to this country. They were brought in the 1930s, 1940s by the plant collectors who went to the Western Himalayas and areas of China, and they brought the species. They actually brought seeds.
These early plant collectors could have had little idea that the seeds they were introducing were a potential ecological time bomb. Collected for their beauty, these exotics soon took root in stately homes like Bodnant. But one particular species, Rhododendron ponticum, its seeds blown by the winds, eventually escaped over the garden wall.
Rhododendron was probably introduced into gardens of large estates like this one as an ornamental, like these beautiful bushes behind me, and then effectively spread from places like this into the open hillside.
This encroachment of rhododendrons into the park has been surveyed. By marking them in red on a map, what is clear and worrying to Rod Gritton is the proliferation of new colonies spread by the prevailing winds.
Each of these clusters of flowers produces 10,000 seeds, so a bush this big is going to produce well over 1 million. The seeds are very, very tiny, they're wind dispersed, and as you can see, they're spreading at an alarming rate over this area.
In the battle for domination, the first weapon of the rhododendron is prolific reproduction. The thousands of individual seeds contained in these pods have little energy invested in them from the parent plant. Their chances of survival are minimal. Successful reproduction depends on their sheer numbers. It's a boom or bust strategy. At the end of the summer, the dried seed pod cracks open, and Snowdonia is bombarded with millions of seeds. Light and aerodynamic, the seeds are easily carried on the wind. Enough will land on fertile ground to produce the next generation. Once the seeds are sown, the infant plants take root. It's in these roots that we see the plant's second means of domination.
What we've got here is the root ball from a rhododendron plant, and if you look carefully with the lens, you'll see that there's absolutely nothing growing in here whatsoever. There's no insects, there's no worms, absolutely nothing.
The lack of any signs of life in the roots may be caused by its association with a microscopic fungus. The theory is that the fungus seen on the root hairs has a mutually beneficial or symbiotic relationship with the host plant. While the rhododendron provides nourishment for the fungus in turn produces a toxin that poisons any neighbouring plants. Without a variety of plants to provide nourishment or habitat, creatures higher up in the food chain are few and far between. The biodiversity of the area is under threat.
We've just crawled our way through the nearest we're ever likely to get in Britain of an impenetrable jungle, but actually it isn't an impenetrable jungle at all. What it is a dense monoculture of Rhododendron ponticum, and as you can see on the ground there's absolutely nothing growing here whatsoever, and if you look upwards you'll see that there's a little bit of light coming through, but it's effectively cutting off the light so that nothing can grow in here.
Having successfully dominated below ground with its root structure, the plant is able to control key resources by drawing water and nutrients from the soil. To dominate above ground, the rhododendron shades out its competitors to monopolise another vital resource for plant life: sunlight. For any plant to flourish, it needs to convert the sun's energy into chemical energy. This is the process of photosynthesis, and it's something that the rhododendron plant is particularly good at. Light enters the leaf of the rhododendron. Here lie cells packed with tiny chloroplasts. It's in the chloroplasts that these chemical reactions take place. The green pigment in the chloroplast, called chlorophyll, absorbs the light energy and becomes excited. Molecules of water drawn up from the roots and molecules of carbon dioxide from the air enter the chloroplast. The chlorophyll now releases its energy. This causes the water molecules to split and to react with the carbon dioxide. It's from this reaction that the sugary food for the plant is created. All plants photosynthesize in this way, but what gives rhododendrons the edge is their extraordinary ability to make the most of the sunlight. The rhododendron can photosynthesize in the deepest of shade, even when only 4% of the available light reaches the leaves. By monopolizing these vital resources for growth, the rhododendron, and the rhododendron alone, flourishes. With the rhododendron's ability to photosynthesize in deep shade, even the ancient woodlands of Snowdonia are under threat.
It's difficult to imagine that Rhododendron ponticum can destroy a wood, but that is exactly what's happening here. All the trees that you can see are mature. This poor old individual here has probably died of old age, got blown down by a wind. All the trees that are here will produce viable seed which will fall to the ground, but they won't be able to germinate, and if they do germinate they won't survive because the rhododendron is effectively choking out the light. Eventually we will end up in this wood with Rhododendron ponticum and nothing else but Rhododendron ponticum.
To control such a formidable enemy requires more than a little pruning. For Rod Gritton and his colleagues, it's more like all-out war.
Okay, this is public enemy number one of the most difficult plants to kill. What we've had to do is to cut the whole plant down, a big bush, come back in a year's time and spray the regrowth. In this particular case, this plant was probably cut 3 or 4 years ago, and we've missed a bit of the regrowth, and we've had to come back 3 or 4 times to spray it. We're going to have to come again, obviously, in order to kill this particular individual.
After death by chainsaw and fire, the raw stumps are sprayed with plant poison. The use of these herbicides may seem a bit of an overkill, until we delve into the peculiar anatomy of the plant. If we take a closer look at the rhododendron plant, we see that it has its own simple defense against this herbicidal chemical warfare. When herbicides like these are sprayed on a plant, they kill by entering its food transport system. The plant's food in the form of sugars is produced by photosynthesis in the leaves. The sugars are now pumped from the leaf into interconnecting phloem tubes. Food is now carried into every cell in the plant in a process called translocation. Introduce herbicide into the translocation system and most common plants will now pump the poisons themselves to every part of their body. But a mature rhododendron plant has a natural defense against this chemical warfare. It's all to do with the anatomy of these phloem vessels. Unlike most plants, the phloem vessels of the rhododendron are far less interconnected. Essentially, each branch has a single pathway to the roots. Miss a single branch with the herbicide, and at least part of the plant will survive. This is why, in Snowdonia, they have to cut down the mature rhododendron plants with their hundreds of leaves and wait for some regrowth from the stump before spraying. It's only by doing this that all the branches are sure to be sprayed and every part of the plant poisoned. In the battle for dominance in the ecosystem of Snowdonia, the rhododendron's biological weaponry gives it key advantages. In the ground offensive, its fungal ally enables root systems to dominate. With the root structure in place, it can now monopolize the valuable resources of water and mineral salts and transport them to the leaves. The battle to convert these resources into food is clinched by the rhododendron's ability to photosynthesize, even in the deepest of shade. And finally, by transporting the foods produced in the leaves through its peculiar anatomy, it defends itself against the herbicidal war. By understanding this unique biology of the rhododendron plant, at last Rod Gritton is learning how to fight back.
The problem with rhododendrons is that they're getting rid of biodiversity. Where they're growing, they're destroying all the insects, all the birds, all the other plants. And in a site like this, where we've cleared rhododendrons some few years ago, at long last we're seeing the oak trees coming back.
By regenerating the oak woodlands, in time, the species that evolved thousands of years ago within the ancient habitats will return, and the decline in biodiversity will finally be reversed. Just downwind from the site where the rhododendrons have been successfully cleared lies Festiniog Slate Quarry. In its barren soil, only one plant seems to be flourishing. In autumn, the seed pods of this plant will explode, and millions of seeds will float across the hills of Snowdonia.